On December 3rd, 1776, Benjamin Franklin arrived in France carrying a mission that sounded almost absurd. He was 70 years old. He represented a rebellion with no secure treasury, no professional navy capable of challenging Britain, and no guarantee that its army would survive another campaign. Across the Atlantic, George Washington was trying to keep the Continental Army from collapsing. In Europe, kings and ministers were watching the American uprising with curiosity, but curiosity was not the same as commitment. Franklin's task was to persuade one of the richest and most cautious monarchies in Europe to risk money, weapons, ships, and eventually war for 13 colonies that might still lose. The paradox was immediate. Franklin had come to ask a king to save a republic. He had come to ask an absolute monarchy to finance a revolution. And he had come to convince France that helping America was not charity. It was strategy. That was the key to everything. Franklin did not need France to love the United States. He needed France to hate Britain more. The American Revolution was not simply a war between colonists and redcoats. It was also the latest chapter in a much older struggle between European empires. Britain had emerged from the 7 Years' War as the dominant global power. France had lost territory, prestige, and influence. Its leaders had not forgotten the humiliation. But revenge was expensive. Another direct war with Britain could drain the French treasury and expose the monarchy to enormous risk. Franklin's genius was to offer France a cheaper weapon, fund the Americans, arm them, keep them alive. Let Britain spend soldiers, ships, money, and political energy fighting across the Atlantic. If the rebellion failed, France could deny how deeply it had been involved. If the rebellion survived, Britain would lose colonies, commerce, strategic reach, and prestige. Franklin was not inventing French hostility. He was converting it into American credit. He was also an unusual choice for the mission. He was not a titled aristocrat. He was not a general. He did not arrive dressed like a polished courtier. He was a printer, writer, inventor, scientist, colonial politician, and one of the most recognizable intellectual figures of the Atlantic world. His experiments with electricity had already made him famous in Europe. Long before he asked France for cannon and loans, French society knew his name. That fame became diplomatic ammunition. Franklin understood that negotiations did not happen only across tables. They happened in salons, newspapers, dinner parties, private conversations, gossip networks, portraits, and public imagination. He cultivated an image that French society could understand and admire. He appeared as the wise man of the New World, simple, rational, uncorrupted. A living contrast to the elaborate rituals of European courts, the image was carefully constructed. His fur cap became a symbol. His face appeared on medallions, rings, watches, and snuff boxes. People who knew almost nothing about the military condition of the Continental Army still knew Franklin. He made the American cause fashionable before he made it fully credible. This mattered because the American position in late 1776 was desperate. Congress had sent Franklin to France with Silas Deane and Arthur Lee as commissioners. Their purpose was to secure support, negotiate recognition, and turn sympathy into material aid. On December 23rd, only weeks after Franklin's arrival, the commissioners presented the French foreign minister, Charles Gravier, the Comte de Vergennes, with a proposal for a treaty of friendship. But France did not immediately accept. Vergennes understood the opportunity, yet he also understood the danger. France could not assume that the Americans would win. It could not be certain that Congress would remain united. It could not know whether Britain might offer concessions and pull the colonies back into the empire. If France openly recognized the United States too early, it might trigger a major war while the American rebellion was still militarily fragile. So Franklin had to operate in the space between interest and fear. He needed French help before France was ready to admit it was helping. That meant secrecy. Long before the formal alliance, French assistance began moving across the Atlantic. Loans, clothing, gunpowder, muskets, cannon and provisions reached the American war effort through channels designed to preserve plausible deniability. Franklin encouraged that support and worked to keep it flowing. The Americans did not need a ceremonial gesture. They needed supplies that could be carried, loaded, fired, worn, and eaten. A revolution survives on ideals only in speeches. In the field, it survives on powder, shoes, cloth, metal, food, and credit. Franklin knew this. So did Washington. The Continental Army was fighting the most powerful empire on Earth with an unstable financial system and chronic shortages. Congress could authorize spending, but paper promises did not automatically become muskets. American merchants could seek supplies, but Britain's naval power made every shipment uncertain. The rebellion needed an external sponsor with money, arsenals, factories, ports, and ships. France had all of them. The difficulty was convincing France to move from secret assistance to open alliance. Franklin's method was not one dramatic trick. It was a series of pressures, each designed to make support for America feel safer, more popular, and more strategically useful than abandoning it. First, he made himself impossible to ignore. Franklin did not behave like a desperate petitioner. He carried himself like the representative of a nation that would eventually exist, whether Europe recognized it immediately or not. That confidence disguised weakness. It also prevented the American mission from looking like a collapsing rebellion begging for rescue. Second, he turned public fascination into political leverage. French elites admired the language of liberty, even while living under a monarchy. They romanticized the American struggle. Franklin gave that romance a human face. Every dinner, visit, portrait, and conversation helped make the American cause part of French cultural life. Supporting America began to feel intellectually modern and emotionally satisfying. Third, he appealed to French power, not French generosity. The argument was simple. Britain was vulnerable. Its army was tied down across an ocean. Its government was spending heavily to suppress the colonies. Its military attention was divided. A relatively limited French investment could produce a disproportionate British loss. Franklin was, in effect, selling France an asymmetric war. He was saying that the Americans would provide the battlefield, the manpower, and the political cause. France only had to provide enough material support to prevent defeat. If the rebellion endured, Britain would pay most of the cost. Fourth, he allowed uncertainty to work in his favor. The French feared that America might reconcile with Britain. Franklin did not need to threaten this openly. The possibility itself was powerful. If France waited too long, Britain might settle the colonial dispute, restore imperial unity, and emerge even stronger. French officials had to consider not only the risk of supporting America, but the risk of failing to support it. This was the pressure point. France wanted evidence that the Americans could survive. America needed French aid in order to survive long enough to produce that evidence. Franklin's diplomacy bridged the gap. He kept the relationship alive while Washington's army fought for the proof Europe demanded. The result was a strange division of labor. In America, soldiers marched, froze, starved, retreated, and attacked. In France, Franklin converted every sign of endurance into an argument for deeper support. A battlefield result became a diplomatic asset. A shipment became another month of resistance. Another month of resistance made recognition more plausible. Franklin was not winning battles, but he was changing what battles meant. A minor American success could become evidence of resilience. A British setback could become proof that the empire was not invincible. A prolonged campaign could become evidence that London was trapped in an expensive war. This was where Franklin's age became an advantage. He was 70, but he did not project frailty. He projected patience. Younger diplomats could appear ambitious, restless, or ideological. Franklin appeared seasoned. He had spent decades observing institutions, personalities, commerce, science, and politics. He knew that people rarely acted for one reason. Vergennes could admire American courage and still fear war. French society could praise liberty and still serve a king. Merchants could support the rebellion for profit. Officers could support it for glory. The monarchy could support it for revenge. Franklin did not demand purity of motive. He assembled motives. This made him extraordinarily difficult to resist. To one audience, America was a cause of liberty. To another, it was a commercial opportunity. To another, it was the best chance in a generation to weaken Britain. To another, it was a stage on which France could recover military honor. He was not selling one America. He was selling the version each listener wanted to support. And while he worked, British intelligence watched. Paris was filled with diplomats, informants, intermediaries, and spies. British officials wanted to know what the Americans were asking for, what France was providing, and whether an alliance was approaching. The American Commission itself was divided by personality and distrust. Franklin, Dean, and Lee did not always move in harmony. Every disagreement created opportunities for confusion and leakage, yet Franklin's calm public manner concealed the danger of the mission. He was working in a city where nearly every important conversation could travel farther than intended. He needed enough publicity to build support, but enough secrecy to protect negotiations. He needed to appear confident without making promises America could not keep. He needed French assistance without allowing France to dictate the political future of the United States. Most of all, he needed time. There was another reason Franklin's performance worked. European diplomacy normally depended on rank, ceremony, and access. Franklin possessed none of the traditional symbols of authority, so he substituted a different kind of power: attention. A courtier could be forgotten when he left the room. Franklin became a subject of conversation after he left it. His simplicity was memorable because it appeared inside a world of ornament. His age was memorable because it suggested wisdom rather than ambition. His scientific reputation was memorable because it made him seem larger than the political faction he represented. This was not accidental modesty, it was positioning. Franklin understood that a diplomat from a weak country cannot dominate negotiations through force. He must dominate the story surrounding the negotiations. The American commissioners could not compel France to act, but Franklin could make the American cause difficult to dismiss. Each public appearance reinforced the idea that the rebellion possessed intelligence, seriousness, and historical momentum. The colonies might lack money, but their representative did not look like a man serving a doomed movement. That perception mattered inside the French government. Ministers could not base policy on fashion, yet fashion altered the atmosphere in which policy was debated. Popular admiration did not sign treaties, but it reduced the social distance between the French elite and the American cause. Franklin made support for the rebellion feel less like an obscure foreign gamble and more like participation in a historic transformation. If you enjoy seeing how diplomacy, logistics, and battlefield strategy lock together, subscribe now, because the most important victories in history are often decided far from the place where the shooting begins. He also knew when not to demand an immediate answer. Pressure applied too openly could expose American weakness. Patience allowed French officials to feel that they were choosing the alliance rather than being cornered into it. Franklin's calm gave them room to move while his underlying arguments steadily narrowed the alternatives. This is one of the most difficult forms of persuasion. The target must feel free while being guided toward one conclusion. Franklin mastered it. During 1777, the war remained uncertain. France continued to hesitate. Secret aid could continue, but open alliance required a military event large enough to change the calculation. That event came at Saratoga. In the autumn of 1777, American forces defeated a major British army in New York. The victory did not end the war, but it transformed the strategic picture. Britain had lost more than a battle. It had lost the argument that organized American resistance would soon collapse. When news of the British surrender reached Paris in December 1777, Franklin finally had the proof France had been waiting for. The Americans could fight. They could defeat a major British force. They might actually win. Saratoga did not replace Franklin's diplomacy. It activated it. For more than a year, Franklin had built the political, cultural, and strategic framework that made an alliance imaginable. Saratoga made it urgent. France now faced a choice: move openly while American momentum was rising, or risk losing the opportunity to shape the outcome. The French government also had to consider Britain's next move. London might attempt reconciliation. If the colonies returned to British control after France had secretly helped them, France would gain little and risk much. But if France recognized the United States and entered the conflict, it could turn a colonial rebellion into a global war at the precise moment Britain appeared vulnerable. Franklin had helped create a situation in which delay looked dangerous. That was the trick. Not deception, not fraud, strategic compression. He compressed French choices until support for America appeared less risky than hesitation. On February 6, 1778, France and the United States signed two agreements, the Treaty of Amity and Commerce and the Treaty of Alliance. The first recognized the commercial and political relationship between the two countries. The second transformed France from a secret supporter into a formal ally against Britain. The rebellion now had international legitimacy. It also had something even more valuable. A great power had entered the war. The alliance changed the scale of the conflict. The financial dimension also changed the psychology of the rebellion. Credit is a statement about the future. A lender gives resources now because he expects the borrower, the project, or the state to exist later. Every French lunch loan therefore carried an unstated judgment. The United States might survive long enough to repay, trade, and matter. That judgment strengthened the American position beyond the value written in any account book. Recognition and credit signaled to merchants, officers, governments, and ordinary observers that the rebellion was becoming durable. Britain could still win battles, but it could no longer assume that time belonged exclusively to the empire. Each month of Allied support made the new American state more real. Franklin's work therefore operated on two levels. He acquired resources for the present, and he manufactured confidence in the future. The first kept armies functioning. The second kept the coalition believing that continued investment would not be wasted. Britain could no longer treat the rebellion as an isolated colonial emergency. It now faced a European rival with a powerful navy, global possessions, experienced officers, arsenals, and the ability to threaten British interests far beyond North America. The war expanded. Every British decision became more complicated. Ships sent to one theatre could not be used in another. Troops guarding one possession could not reinforce another. The empire still had enormous strength, but its attention was now divided. This was exactly what Franklin had promised, without needing to say it plainly. America would become the center of a much larger strategic problem. French support also became measurable in money and material. During the Revolution, the French government extended loans to the United States totaling more than $2 million in the money of the period, and Franklin negotiated most of them. That figure represented far more than financial generosity. It represented confidence converted into war-making capacity. A loan could pay for supplies. Supplies could sustain an army. An army that survived could force Britain to keep spending. British spending could deepen war fatigue. War fatigue could change politics. Franklin understood the chain. He did not ask France merely to purchase American gratitude. He offered a mechanism for weakening Britain over time. This is why the title's language of trickery captures something real, even though France was never ignorant of its own motives. Franklin made the American War appear to be France's opportunity. He aligned American survival with French ambition so effectively that funding the rebellion became an act of French self-interest. The brilliance was not in hiding the cost. It was in magnifying the payoff. Franklin's personal role continued after the alliance. On March 23, 1779, he presented his credentials to Louis XVI and became the first accredited American minister abroad. The symbolism was enormous. A man who had arrived representing a fragile rebellion now stood as the recognized envoy of a sovereign state. But recognition did not guarantee victory. The war continued. Armies still had to march. Ships still had to sail. Britain remained dangerous. American finances remained unstable. The alliance had created a path, not an outcome. The question was whether French power could be applied at the right time and place. By 1781, that answer emerged in Virginia. British General Charles Cornwallis established his army at Yorktown. American and French forces moved to trap him. The operation required coordination on a scale the rebellion could not have achieved alone. Troops had to converge. The Chesapeake had to be controlled. British reinforcement or evacuation had to be prevented. This was where Franklin's diplomatic victory became military geometry. At the end of September 1781, approximately 17,600 American and French troops faced about 8,300 British troops at Yorktown. The Allied army held a decisive numerical advantage, but numbers on land were only part of the trap. At sea, The French fleet under Admiral de Grasse had moved toward the Chesapeake with 37 vessels, including 28 ships of the line. That fleet changed everything. Without control of the water, Cornwallis was not simply outnumbered, he was contained. Britain's greatest global advantage had always been maritime power. At Yorktown, French naval presence denied the British the freedom they needed to rescue or remove the trapped army. The siege tightened. American and French forces advanced their lines. Artillery battered British positions. Escape routes narrowed. Every day made relief less likely. The army inside Yorktown was not being defeated by one brilliant charge. It was being compressed by coordination. Land forces held the perimeter. French ships closed the sea. Time did the rest. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis capitulated. The last major land battle of the American Revolution ended with a British army surrendering to a coalition that would have been almost unimaginable 5 years earlier. Think about the chain of events. A 70-year-old printer and scientist crossed the Atlantic in 1776, representing a government with uncertain credit. He entered a monarchy and became the public face of a republic. He persuaded French officials to support the American cause secretly, while they hesitated to support it openly. He used fame to shape opinion. He used British power to frighten France. He used French resentment to sustain America. He waited for Washington's war effort to produce proof. Then Saratoga gave him the proof. The treaties gave America an ally. The loans helped sustain the war. French troops and ships helped build the trap at Yorktown. And the trap helped force the surrender of 8,300 British troops to an Allied force of roughly 17,600. Franklin had not commanded the siege. He had not fired the artillery. He had not sailed with de Grasse. But years earlier, he had helped make their presence possible. That is the deeper meaning of strategic diplomacy. It changes which armies exist, which supplies arrive, which governments take risks, and which battlefields become decisive. Franklin's achievement was not that he fooled France into acting against its interests. It was that he redefined France's interests until American independence became part of them. He understood that nations rarely help weaker nations because they are moved by principle alone. They help when principle, profit, fear, revenge, prestige, and opportunity point in the same direction. His diplomacy made them point toward America. There was also a hidden cost. France's intervention was expensive. Loans, supplies, armies, and fleets all demanded resources. Strategic victory over Britain came with costs that Franklin could not control. Diplomacy rarely ends exactly where its architects expect. But in the immediate struggle for American independence, the result was undeniable. France had entered the war. Britain had been forced to fight a broader conflict. Spain joined the war against Britain in 1779. The Dutch Republic later recognized American independence in 1782. What had begun as a rebellion inside the British Empire had become an international contest. Franklin had helped move the United States from isolation to coalition. That transition may have been more important than any single speech he gave or any single document he signed. Isolated rebellions can be crushed. Coalitions change the balance of power. Franklin understood that the American colonies did not need to become stronger than Britain in every category. They only needed to make Britain's enemies useful. France did not have to believe in the American project, exactly as Americans did. It only had to believe that American survival damaged Britain. This was strategic leverage in its purest form. Use another power's rivalry. Use its memory of defeat. Use its fear of missing an opportunity. Use public enthusiasm to reinforce private calculation. Use time to transform secret assistance into open commitment. And when the battlefield finally creates the right moment, make hesitation more dangerous than action. That is what Franklin did. The American Revolution is often remembered through images of muskets, winter camps, cavalry charges, and surrender ceremonies. But behind those scenes stood a financial and diplomatic war. Someone had to secure the powder before it could be fired. Someone had to secure the uniforms before troops could march in them. Someone had to secure the credit before agents could purchase the next shipment. Someone had to convince a monarchy that the survival of a republic was worth the risk of war. Franklin fought that war in rooms without smoke. His weapons were reputation, patience, ambiguity, information, and timing. He understood human vanity. French society wanted access to the famous philosopher. Franklin gave it access. French officers wanted glory. America offered a battlefield. French merchants wanted commerce. Independence promised new trade. Vergennes wanted to weaken Britain. The Revolution created the opportunity. Louis XVI wanted strategic advantage without reckless exposure. Secret aid created a bridge toward formal alliance. Each desire became a lever. Franklin pulled them together. His genius was cumulative. No single dinner won the alliance. No single portrait released alone. No single conversation moved the French fleet to the Chesapeake. But each action helped create an environment in which the next action became possible. Public fascination supported diplomatic access. Diplomatic access supported secret aid. Secret aid supported military endurance. Military endurance made Saratoga possible. Saratoga made formal alliance possible. Alliance made broader intervention possible. Intervention made Yorktown possible. Yorktown made continued British war increasingly difficult. The chain was not inevitable. It had to be built. Franklin built his part of it with extraordinary discipline. He also understood a truth that many leaders miss. Weakness does not always have to be concealed. Sometimes it can be converted into urgency. America's vulnerability made French assistance valuable. Its lack of a great navy made French naval power decisive. Its shortage of credit made French loans transformative. The very things America lacked created opportunities for France to matter. Franklin did not present the United States as self-sufficient. He presented it as strategically unfinished. France could help complete the weapon. This is why the mission was so powerful. Franklin was asking France to invest before the final result was known. That required a narrative about the future. He had to make French ministers imagine a world in which Britain was weaker, American commerce was open, and France had helped create a new nation. The Americans could not offer certainty. Franklin offered possibility. Then he made possibility feel like opportunity, and opportunity feel like necessity. The years after 1778 proved the value of that transformation. French money continued to support the American cause. French military power entered the struggle. The war widened. British planners had to protect a global empire. The American rebellion was no longer alone. When the siege lines closed at Yorktown, Franklin's work was present in every French uniform, every French cannon, every ship of the line holding the Chesapeake, and every calculation that told Cornwallis' escape was disappearing. That is not poetic exaggeration. It is the practical effect of alliance. Armies do not appear from ideas. Fleets do not sail because of admiration. Governments do not spend millions because a diplomat is charming. They act because someone has connected emotion to interest, interest to policy, policy to resources, and resources to operations. Franklin connected the chain. He gave France a reason to see American independence not as a distant experiment, but as a strategic blow against Britain. He gave French society a symbol it wanted to celebrate. He gave ministers enough flexibility to help secretly before they were ready to help openly. He gave the alliance time to become politically possible. And when Saratoga changed the military equation, he was already in position to turn victory into commitment. That final point matters. Opportunities are useless if no one is prepared to exploit them. Saratoga was the battlefield breakthrough, but Franklin had spent more than a year preparing the diplomatic ground. Without that preparation, France might still have acted, but later, more cautiously, or on different terms. The American commissioners had already opened channels, made proposals, built relationships, and framed the war as a shared strategic opportunity. When the moment came, they did not need to begin. They needed to close. On February 6, 1778, they did. The treaties signed that day did not guarantee that every French decision would serve American goals. Alliances never eliminate competing interests, but they changed the balance of the war. The United States gained recognition, commerce, finance, military support, and a partner capable of challenging Britain at sea. For Britain, the cost of suppressing the rebellion rose dramatically. For America, the possibility of survival became a strategy for victory. And for Franklin, the mission became one of the greatest demonstrations of diplomatic leverage in modern history. He arrived with no army under his personal command. He left behind a coalition. He arrived asking Europe to gamble on America. He made the gamble look like revenge, commerce, prestige, and strategic necessity. He did not trick France by hiding the truth. He tricked the balance of power by making a weak republic useful to a strong monarchy. That is the real story. Benjamin Franklin did not fund America's war with money of his own. He did something more difficult. He convinced another nation that funding America was the smartest way to fight its oldest enemy. And once France believed that, the revolution was no longer only America's war. It was Europe's opportunity. If you think Franklin's greatest weapon was his mind, rather than a musket, subscribe and tell us in the comments which mattered more to American independence: Washington's army in the field or Franklin's alliance in Europe.